I've been a ranger in the Rocky Mountains for 17 years. I've dealt with lost hikers, bear encounters, illegal camps, you name it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, comes close to what happened in 2019. It's the only incident that still makes my stomach drop when I think about it. This won't be a paranormal story. What I saw, what I found, it was human. That's what makes it worse. It started like most bad stories do, with a missing person. A woman named Claire Henson, 27, was hiking alone near a lesser-used trail on the northern ridge. She texted her sister that morning saying the trail was quiet, too quiet, and that she felt like she was being watched. That was the last anyone heard from her. Her car was still at the trailhead, 4 hours overdue, then 8, then 13. By the next morning, we officially had a missing hiker. I was assigned to sweep a section of old forestry road that branched off from her planned route. 99% of the time, missing hikers follow predictable patterns. But not Claire. She disappeared like she stepped off the earth. On day 2 of the search, I found a campsite. Not hers. This one was hidden. Too well hidden. About a half-mile off trail, tucked behind a wall of dead-fallen undergrowth. It looked lived in. Recently, there was a half-burnt fire pit, 2 soiled blankets, a pile of instant noodle wrappers, a tarp roof tied low to keep it unseen, and this strange smell, like sweat and rotting food. But something was off. There were 3 separate sets of footprints around the area, all different sizes. One looked small, almost like a teenager's or a petite woman's. The smallest set caught my attention immediately. Barefoot, human. Barefoot. In the Rockies. In October. I radioed the team. They told me to back out and wait. We didn't know if the people who stayed there could be dangerous. But before I left, I noticed something half buried behind the tarp. A scrap of bright blue fabric. Claire's jacket had been bright blue. That night, the search was paused due to incoming storms. Lightning was hitting the ridges too often for us to stay out there. I remained at a small ranger outpost cabin, just 3 miles from where I'd found the campsite. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard whistling. High-pitched, short, 2 notes, then silence. A pattern. At first I figured it was wind through the cracks, but it repeated, and repeated again, closer. I stepped outside with my flashlight. Nothing but dark trees and fog. Then the whistle came from behind the cabin. I swung around fast, light scanning the tree line, and for a split second, I saw a figure. Thin, short, standing behind a ponderosa pine. Watching. But when I aimed the flashlight fully, it was gone. Footsteps crunched away into the dark. I told myself it was an animal or my lack of sleep, but deep down I knew those were human footsteps and someone had been standing 10 feet from my cabin. The next morning, the storm passed and we resumed the search. We focused around the hidden campsite. About 100 yards downhill, we found something none of us expected. A shallow pit in the ground, freshly dug, the size of a bathtub. One of the deputies muttered, "This looks like a grave." But inside was nothing, just disturbed soil and a broken shovel handle. But what made all of us uneasy was the set of bare footprints around the pit, the same size as the ones near the campsite. Small, human, bare. The prints led into the thick brush heading north. We followed them. They led us to a narrow ravine where a cluster of boulders created a natural overhang. Except it wasn't natural anymore. Someone had dug into the hillside to expand the space, creating a crude tunnel-like shelter about 3 feet high. Inside, we found empty water jugs, old blankets, a knife stuck into a log, strings of animal bones hanging like wind chimes, and in the far back, a disposable phone. The phone had one video saved on it. When we hit play, the screen showed a grainy image of a woman sitting in the dark, crying, whispering, "Please, please just let me go." It was Claire. We immediately radioed for backup. This was no longer a search. It was a recovery or a rescue, depending on how fast we moved. But then one of the deputies found something else carved into the dirt wall. The letters were jagged, rushed, like someone wrote them moments before running. "Don't follow me." We spread out carefully, weapons ready. My job was to circle around the ravine and check the ridge above for movement. Halfway up the slope, I heard whispering. At first it sounded like a radio left on low volume, but my radio was silent. The whispering continued. 2 voices, one frantic, one calm. I crouched behind a tree, heart pounding, and listened. "She's not ready." Then silence. Every hair on my neck rose. I stepped forward carefully and snapped a twig. The whispering stopped instantly, followed by the unmistakable sound of feet running through brush. I chased the sound, yelling for them to stop, but whoever it was moved fast, faster than any normal hiker. They disappeared into a maze of pines and rock slabs, but I did see one thing just before they vanished. A bare foot, coated in mud, gripping a rock as the figure climbed out of sight. 10 minutes later, another ranger radioed that they'd found her. Claire. She was alive, barely, hidden behind a fallen tree, huddled under a ripped sleeping bag, shaking uncontrollably. She kept saying, "They're still here, they're watching us." She had bruises on her wrists, dirt under her nails, and she was missing her shoes. She kept repeating one word. "They." Not he, not him, they. We evacuated her immediately by helicopter, but the story wasn't over. A search team swept the entire area for 3 days after we found Claire. We discovered evidence of multiple people living out there. There were 3 separate campsites with food caches, stashes of clothes, a rusted hatchet, a half-burnt notebook filled with incoherent phrases, and dozens of barefoot footprints. But we never found the individuals themselves. Not one. They vanished deeper into the Rockies like ghosts. The sheriff later told me, quietly, that the region had long been rumored to harbor a group of squatters, people who chose to live off-grid, far from society, hostile to anyone who invaded their territory. We suspect Claire crossed into their area, and they didn't want her to leave. Even today, sometimes hikers report strange things. Whistling, bones hanging from trees, low voices carrying through the canyons, and sometimes bare footprints where there shouldn't be any. But here's what keeps me up. 3 months after Claire was rescued, I returned to check the old campsite area. Right at the tree line, just outside the ravine, I found a fresh, small, bare human footprint, and next to it, scratched into the dirt, "We remember you." I stopped going out alone after that, because some people don't want to be found, and some people don't want to let go. I've always loved backcountry hiking. Remote trails, no cell service, No noise except wind and water. So when my buddy Travis told me about a cave he stumbled on while scouting an off-trail route in the Colorado San Juans, I agreed to go check it out. That cave is the reason I don't hike alone anymore. It's the reason I still get nightmares, and it's why I'm telling this story the way I wish someone had told me. Do not go into undiscovered caves. You don't know who or what already lives there. And again, this is not a paranormal story. What I found was human, horribly, disturbingly human. The cave entrance looked innocent enough, small, like a little black mouth between slabs of limestone. We had to crawl to get in, helmets scraping ceiling, dust sifting around us. Travis told me he hadn't explored far, just enough to see it opened into something big. The first red flag came not 10 minutes inside. A noise, a faint, echoing noise. It sounded like a scream, muffled, like someone screaming with their mouth covered. Travis laughed it off as wind through the cracks, but wind doesn't sound like a word. And I swear I heard the word, help. But I didn't want to be the guy who got spooked by echo tricks, so we pushed deeper. That was the second mistake. About 20 minutes in, the passage suddenly widened into a room. Our headlamps revealed a circular chamber, maybe 15 feet wide, with a ceiling that arched high enough we could finally stand. The floor was smooth dust, and there were marks in it. Footprints. Not ours. Old, but human-sized. Barefoot. Right away my stomach turned. There were also drag marks, like something heavy had been pulled across the ground toward a narrow corridor on the opposite side. Travis whispered, probably animals. I whispered back, animals don't walk on 2 feet. He went quiet. That was when I saw something poking out from behind a rock pile. A shoe. A woman's hiking shoe. Old, sun-faded, but definitely not from an animal. We should have left right then, but curiosity overrules survival sometimes. We followed the drag marks through the corridor. The tunnel tightened around us, forcing us to crouch again. I kept hearing things behind us, shuffling, tapping on rock. At one point, Travis grabbed my shoulder. Did you hear that? We both froze. There it was again, a whisper, very faint. Not words, just the rhythm of a whisper. A human breath pushing sound into darkness. The worst part, it wasn't coming from ahead of us. It was coming from behind. We whipped around with our headlamps. Nothing, just a long black tunnel that suddenly felt alive. Let's go back, I said. But going back wasn't an option anymore, because when we turned, the tunnel ahead of us wasn't empty. At the far end of our light's reach, someone stood hunched in the passage. A human silhouette, small, thin, barefoot, facing us. Their arms hung crooked, their head tilted too far to one side, hair matted and long, covering most of their face. My brain refused to process it. Travis whispered, "Dude," but his voice cracked. I called out, "Hello, are you hurt? We can help you." The figure didn't move, just stared. Then it did something I'll never forget. It stepped backward into the darkness without turning around, like it knew the cave perfectly, like it lived there. We stood frozen another 10 seconds before Travis hissed, "We need to go," and we ran. Running inside a cave is a special kind of terror. Your light bounces so wildly, you lose orientation instantly. Shadows jump everywhere. Rocks snag your gear. Every noise sounds like something chasing you. We sprinted back toward the chamber. At least we thought we did. But caves don't care about your memory. We took one wrong turn. One, and the tunnel dead-ended into a tiny alcove. No room to turn around. We felt the air shift behind us. A breath. Close. I spun with my flashlight in shaking hands. Nothing. But the dust behind us was disturbed. Fresh footprints. Bare. Coming right up to us. Stopping 3 feet away. Then turning back around. Someone had walked right up to us while we were facing the other way and silently retreated. Travis started to panic hard, breathing too fast. "We're not alone, man. We're not alone." I grabbed him, forced him to slow his breathing, and we crawled back out into the main corridor, or what we hoped was the main corridor. Instead of the circular chamber, we stumbled into something worse. A wide space filled with piles of old clothing. Women's, men's, children's, all ages, all brands, all dirty, shredded or rotting. There were sleeping bags too, knives, plastic containers with chewed lids, a lantern with dried blood smeared on the metal, a campsite, but not one belonging to hikers, more like a nest. Something scraped across rock behind a boulder on the far wall, a dragging sound, then a whisper, "Stay." Travis bolted. I didn't blame him. By some miracle, while running blindly in pure terror, we hit a sliver of daylight leaking from the ceiling, a natural chimney in the rock, a vertical shaft, a way out. The climb was terrifying. Slick rock, loose footholds, narrow walls, but adrenaline does things to the human body. I shoved Travis up first, then clawed my way out behind him. We spilled onto a rocky hillside, gasping like we'd been underwater. The cave entrance was 20 yards downslope. A shadow flickered inside. Someone had followed us to the exit but didn't climb out, just stood in the darkness, watching the sunlight. We reported the cave to local authorities. A ranger I'd met a few times, Harrison, pulled us aside and said something I'll never forget. There are people who disappear into these mountains, not the missing ones you hear about. I mean the ones who choose to disappear. They find caves, mines, old cabins. They survive however they can. They avoid society, and they do not like being found. He said they would collapse the entrance to the cave, but when we returned with them, the interior was empty. The clothing piles were gone. The lantern was gone. The footprints were covered. Every trace of habitation wiped, as if someone knew we were coming back, as if someone moved deeper into the mountain. Even now, when I hike anywhere near that region, I get this feeling, like eyes are watching from inside cracks and shadows, like someone is waiting for the next curious hiker to enter the wrong cave. And this time, maybe they won't get out. I've been a ranger in the Rockies for a long time, long enough to know the difference between something dangerous and something wrong. This happened 6 years ago, and it's the only incident that made me consider quitting for good. People online call these stories skinwalker encounters, but what I dealt with wasn't a creature, it was human, and that's why it still scares me. It started with a call on the radio. A solo hiker reported that someone was following him, just above the timberline, not attacking, not talking, just matching his pace, step for step. He said every time he looked back, the person would duck behind a boulder or tree. He couldn't describe them, just said they were wrong somehow. Tall, or maybe not tall, he said. Wearing something loose, or maybe nothing at all. People say weird stuff when they're scared and out of breath, so I didn't think much of it. But his last transmission did get my attention. They said my name, but it wasn't my voice. It sounded like someone trying to mimic me. Then the radio cut out. I hiked out to find him. I found his backpack first, just sitting in the middle of the trail, like he'd set it down carefully. Not dropped, not thrown. Beside it were his footprints, and another set. Barefoot, wide, long strides. The kind you'd expect from someone used to walking on rough terrain. But the weirdest part? The barefoot tracks circled the pack, twice, like whoever made them was pacing around it. I radioed his name. Tom, this is Ranger Lewis. Respond if you hear me. The wind answered. Nothing else. But after a few seconds, I heard something faint behind the trees. A voice. My voice. Tom. This is Ranger Lewis. Respond. Someone was repeating my transmission back into the woods. I scanned the hillside with binoculars. Movement flashed between the trees. Quick, light, like a person running on their toes. I shouted, "This is law enforcement. Identify yourself." The forest went dead silent. Then, from somewhere above me, the same voice responded, distorted. "Law enforcement. Identify yourself." That's when I realized two things. Whoever this was, they had been shadowing Tom long enough to hear and mimic his voice. And now they were mocking me too. This wasn't an animal, wasn't a hiker. This was a person, someone who lived out here, someone comfortable enough with the woods to move without being seen, and someone who enjoyed messing with people. I continued up the ridge. The trees thinned, the wind picked up. Then I found something lodged between two rocks. Tom's shirt, ripped straight down the back. No blood, no sign of a struggle, just torn fabric. As I examined it, a whisper drifted from somewhere behind me. Lewis. My name. Soft. Too soft. Like someone was trying to figure out how to pronounce it. I spun around with my flashlight. Nothing. Then again, this time closer, drawn out, unnatural, like a child practicing a new word. I backed toward a ledge and radioed for backup. Before they could answer, a figure stepped briefly between two distant boulders. Thin, tall, hair hanging to the shoulders. Barefoot. They weren't approaching me. They were waiting. Backup arrived 40 minutes later. As soon as I heard their voices calling out, the woods seemed to exhale. We found Tom half a mile further up the ridge. He was crouched under an overhang, shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. He kept saying, it kept calling my name, but wrong. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a man. We got him out of there immediately, but before we left the area, one of the deputies called me over. He'd found something, down a steep slope, hidden behind a tangle of deadfall. We found a small camp, if you could even call it that. It looked more like a den. Inside was a pile of clothes, none newer than 10 years, scraps of fabric braided into cords, animal bones arranged in patterns, a rusted cooking pot, and a journal. The journal was half destroyed from moisture, but some pages were readable. Mostly ramblings about watching hikers, learning voices, practicing speech. One page said, "They leave words everywhere. All you need is to listen long enough." Another, "Names taste different on the tongue." But the last page is what still bothers me. If they come looking, stay just far enough, close enough to whisper. Whoever wrote it wasn't mentally stable, and they weren't living near the trails by accident. They were hunting company. As we escorted Tom down the mountain, we kept hearing it. A single whistle, low, repeating every few minutes, not chasing us, not approaching, just tracking our descent. A reminder I'm still here. When we reached the trailhead and loaded Tom into an ambulance, the whistling finally stopped. Right before I got into the truck, I looked back at the tree line, and I saw them. A figure on the ridge, barely visible against the fading light, standing perfectly still, watching. 2 days later, I went back with a larger team to clear the area. The den was abandoned. Everything inside had been taken. Only one thing remained. A single bare footprint in the mud from someone who knew the wilderness like a second skin. Someone still out there. People love throwing around the word skinwalker. It makes it sound almost supernatural, easier to process. But what we dealt with wasn't folklore. It was a person. A human being who lived out there so long they learned how to move without sound, how to mimic what they heard, and how to stalk without being seen. And worst of all, they're still out there. Because in all my years of ranger work, I've learned one truth. Some people don't want to be found, and some people don't want you to leave their woods alive. My name is Luke, and I used to think the Rocky Mountains were my safe place. I grew up camping and hiking. I thought I was prepared for anything nature could throw at me, but nothing, not the weather, the wildlife, or the terrain, prepared me for what I met out there. I'm telling this because I want people to know that not everything dangerous in the wilderness walks on 4 legs. Some things walk on 2. In the summer of 2021, I decided to do a solo camping trip deep into a less trafficked area of the Rockies. I didn't want a casual hike. I wanted something challenging, remote, and quiet. I picked a region known for steep canyons, loose switchbacks, and barely any cell service. It was the kind of place where you might go 2 or 3 days without seeing another person. That was exactly what I wanted. But looking back, the isolation is probably what almost got me killed. The first day was normal. I parked at a small dirt turnout, hiked 7 miles into the backcountry, set up my tent by a creek, and cooked ramen on my little camp stove. But just before sunset, I noticed something odd. A single boot print in the mud near the creek. But it wasn't mine. It was bigger, deeper. I didn't think much of it, just assumed another hiker passed through earlier. The Rockies aren't empty, just quiet. Still, it bothered me. The tread pattern was strange, chunky, angular, almost like a work boot, not a hiking boot. I shrugged it off and went to bed. Sometime deep in the night, maybe 2 or 3 a.m., a sound woke me up. It was a single sharp whistle, like someone trying to get a friend's attention. It came from the trees behind my tent. Then, a few moments later, another one. Same pitch, same length, this time from farther away. It sounded deliberate. I sat there in my sleeping bag, heart pounding, telling myself it could be anything. Wind, a bird, something natural. But I'm not stupid. Birds don't whistle like a person trying to signal. And the wind doesn't repeat itself with the same exact pattern. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I packed up fast and hiked deeper into the canyon, partly because I didn't want to hike back toward whatever made that sound. Around noon, I reached a narrow ridge where the trail turned steep and exposed. I stopped to drink water, and when I glanced up across the ravine, my blood ran cold. Someone was standing on the opposite ridge, still, facing me, watching me. He was too far away to see clearly, but I could make out the outline. Tall, broad shoulders, dark clothing. It wasn't a ranger, and it wasn't a hiker with a giant pack. He looked empty-handed and was just standing there. I waved, trying to act normal. He didn't wave back. I blinked, looked down for half a second to zip my water bottle pouch, and when I looked back up, he was gone. The ridge was bare. Nowhere to hide except a steep drop or a dense tree line. I told myself he must have walked away. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe the sun was messing with my eyes. But deep down, I knew he'd been there, and he was watching me. I pushed hard that day, hiking another 7 miles until I reached a flat clearing surrounded by pine trees. I set up camp, but I couldn't shake the feeling someone was nearby. Right before dusk, I heard crunching in the woods behind me. Not the light patter of deer. Heavy, uneven footsteps. Human. I shouted, "Hello." No response. I grabbed my bear spray. As darkness fell, I zipped myself inside my tent, but I barely slept. Around 11 p.m., I heard something outside, rustling. Then, slow footsteps began circling my tent, deliberate, measured. I held my breath, praying it was an animal. Then I heard it. A man breathing. I didn't move an inch. After a minute, the footsteps stopped. I stayed awake until sunrise. When I finally crawled out of the tent, everything looked normal until I noticed something chilling. 2 large footprints right outside my tent door, facing it like someone had stood there for a long time, just watching. At this point, all I wanted was to get out. I packed my gear at record speed and practically jogged back toward the trail. The hike back felt wrong. I kept hearing little things, rustling behind me, rocks tumbling somewhere out of sight. And every time I turned around, the trail was empty. But I knew I wasn't alone. When I reached the narrow canyon pass, I slowed. The rocky walls closed in tight, maybe 15 feet across. Halfway through, I spotted something hanging from a branch, a piece of blue paracord tied into a noose-like loop. My paracord. I recognized the frayed end. I had cut some off 2 days earlier to hang my food bag. Someone had taken it and hung it here, directly in my path. A warning, or an invitation. I froze, scanning the canyon walls. That's when I heard it again. The whistle. This time it came from behind me. Then another whistle echoed from ahead of me. One in front, one behind. They were communicating. My heart slammed into my throat. I wasn't dealing with one person. There were 2. I made a choice in that canyon. I didn't think. I just ran. Full sprint. Pack slamming against my back. Boots skidding on loose gravel. Behind me, I heard shouting. A man yelling something I couldn't understand. Then the rapid crunch of footsteps. They were chasing me. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs felt like fire. My vision blurred. I tripped twice, scraped my arms, didn't stop. Finally, I reached the tree line near the trailhead. I could see the dirt road through the branches, and that's when I saw him. A man standing between me and the parking turnout. He stepped forward, tall, wearing a dark jacket. No expression. Dirty boots. The same tread pattern I'd seen by the creek. He didn't move toward me. He just blocked the trail, staring. Behind me, I heard the second man crashing through the brush. I was trapped, so I made the only move I had. I threw my pack at the guy blocking the trail, turned hard right, and bolted downhill straight through the dense forest. Branches ripped at my arms. My shins hit rocks. I had no path, just gravity and desperation. I didn't stop until I heard the distant hum of an engine. A car. I burst out onto a service road and flagged down a truck, screaming for help. The older couple driving didn't ask many questions. They drove me straight to the nearest ranger station. Rangers went back to my campsite the next morning. They didn't find the men, but they did find a set of fresh boot prints, a cut section of my paracord, a spot where someone had been sitting and watching my tent, and a makeshift lean-to shelter about 300 yards from where I'd camped, clearly lived in recently. Inside they found food wrappers, cigarette butts, and an empty bottle of whiskey. Whoever those men were, they had been out there for a while, watching hikers, studying them, possibly stalking them. The rangers told me this wasn't the first report of strange activity in that area, but nobody had gotten as close as I did. 3 weeks after I got home, I received a call from the ranger I had spoken to. They had finished checking the area more thoroughly. Inside the shelter, hidden under a tarp, they found something they missed the first time. A disposable camera. Most of the photos were nothing. Trees, trails, animals. But one of the photos was different. It was a picture of me, taken at dusk. I was kneeling by the creek on my first night, filtering water. The angle made it clear. The photographer had been standing no more than 30 feet behind me. To this day, I don't know what those men wanted, or how long they'd been out there. I don't know if they were drifters, criminals hiding in the mountains, or just predators who learn the wilderness lets them get close to people unseen. All I know is this: the Rockies used to be my escape. Now they're the place where I learned the truth. You never really know who's sharing the woods with you, and some people go into the mountains because they know nobody will hear you scream.